Today we're going to be doing an oil pan gasket along with all the associated seals for the front differential oil change on this F15 X5. It's got the N55 in it. This one's a 2016, but for any N55 powered F15, the process will be the same. This is an Xdrive. Obviously, if you have just the rear wheel drive model, this will be a lot simpler without the front differential. So the parts that I have are the oil pan gasket itself. These are two O-rings that go on the sides of the differential. And then we have the differential axle seals, an oil filter with oil, and then differential fluid for the front differential. There are a couple of non-standard tools that you'll need. You'll need a 17 millimeter Allen socket like this for the front axles. You need a 14 millimeter. I also have a cutoff Allen wrench there that I can use. Those are for the drain and fill plug on the front differential. And then you'll obviously need all your normal sockets, Torx sockets, e-Torx sockets. There may be a handful of other oddball ones in there, which I can call out as I encounter them. Those are the ones that I remember off the top of my head. The other thing you'll need is an engine brace. We're going to be removing the whole front subframe, or at least lowering it, so we need to support the engine from the top side. And then the way that we adapt that to the engine, this is a tow hook off of I couldn't tell you what exactly it's for. It's a newer, probably 2014 and up, maybe an F30, F15 style tow hook. It's been shaved down, and I'll show you where that goes, but that's how we attach the engine brace to the engine itself. And then I would 100% recommend doing this job on a lift. You're more than welcome to lay on the ground for however many days this may take you. This is going to be significantly easier with a lift, as we have to have a lot of room to lower the front subframe. So I'm going to start on the top side here. We're going to go ahead and get that engine support brace installed. First thing I'm going to do is remove this fresh air hose. Just pull straight up and away from the engine, and then we're going to remove the beauty cover as well. With those out of the way, we can expose that threaded hole right there. That is where this tow hook is going to install. As you can see, it had to be shaved to fit by the head there. So we'll thread that in as far as we can get it, and that's what we'll attach our cross brace to. Our cross brace is going to take a little bit to get set up, I believe, because these do not have any support under them. Normally you'd lay it across the tops of the fenders. That's not going to be very structural there. So I'm going to play around with it, find a way to get it across the engine bay here. All right, so I went ahead and got that fitted. On top of the metal frame rails here, I am on the plastic on one side. I'm taking that risk. If it breaks, it breaks. And this side I had to make a shim to get it partially on the metal and then partially supported by the wood. Not my favorite setup. This chassis is a little hard to work with to get the brace straight across it, but I've got it, and right now I have it supporting most of the weight of the engine from the top side here. And now I'm going to go ahead and start working underneath. The last thing I'll do up here before I do that is I'm actually going to break the oil filter cap loose so that it can let all that oil drain out. Okay, so I went ahead and got the car up in the air, got the front tires off, and now I'm going to start removing all of the under tray that's in the way. So we got the main belly pan here. I've already got it partially removed. And then we have this piece here, the piece that runs up and over the top. We'll go ahead and get out of the way. We'll remove this one around the transmission as well, and then go ahead and remove the metal plate as well. All right, now with all that out of the way, we can finally see what we're working on here. So you can see I've got a lot of fluid coming out of that axle seal, as well as along the oil pan here. I cleaned this relatively recently, so it doesn't look as bad as it actually is. So what we're going to do next, start working on removing the axles so that we can eventually get the differential out as well. So for the axles, we have dust boots on either side. Just get under that with a screwdriver, pop it out. The other side here is already removed. And then you'll need a socket to remove that. If you can get under there and unstake those, all the better. If you have a big enough impact, it'll straighten those out for you. I believe that's a 36 millimeter 12 point that you need to remove that, but I will verify. So we'll remove both of those, and then we're going to go ahead and unhook the shock bolt and the inside lower control arm bolt there, and that should give us enough room to swing out the whole knuckle and remove each axle. So to confirm, those were 36 millimeters on the axle nuts and then 21 for both bolts going through. So now that we have that all loose, as you can see, the knuckle has quite a bit of room to move around. So we need to push the axle through. Be careful when you're hammering this that you don't flatten the end of it, because then you won't be able to get the nut back on when you put it back together. But use a hammer. If you have an old nut, you can put the nut on top to then hammer it through. You may need a punch, so you're going to push it all the way through. We're going to pull back on this and then kind of move the axle off to the side so it's no longer in the hub there. So as you can see, I now have this axle out of the hub there. Now we need to pop it out of the differential. I don't know what you want to call this, just the extension that goes through the pan there. The way that we're going to do that is by pushing on the axle itself. You don't want to be pushing on this small black ring here, as you'll bend that, but on the actual axle body. So you can either get a punch and a hammer and pop that loose, or you can try to wedge a pry bar in there. Get creative, but it should pop out relatively easily. So you'll hammer it or pry on it, it'll pop out about a 1/4 inch, and then it should just slide right out. After you get it broken free, you're going to pull this out of the way and fish that whole axle out. It's going to extend through the oil pan to about here, so it's going to be pretty long to get maneuvered out of there. You're going to have to finagle it around the lower part of the shock there as well. So now that I'm to this point, I'm realizing that obviously the axle is backing out into this piece here. What I'm going to do is remove this lower part of the shock here, one bolt through. So once we pull that out, you should be able to wiggle it, get that pulled down, and then remove it, and then the axle will have all the room it needs to slide out of the way. All right, so once that lower piece of the shock is out of the way, plenty of room, the axle slides right out. Now we'll go ahead, do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to remove that piece of the shock first, just because I know it's going to get in the way, and then push the axle through, pop it out just the same as the other side. All right, there's this side removed. I actually needed to push the axle through before I could pull the lower collar off the strut there. There just wasn't enough room to get it removed. So got both axles out, and I said at the very beginning of the video you'd need a 17 millimeter Allen socket. I was wrong on that. On a lot of the newer BMWs, that's an Allen bolt that goes through here. Apparently this was not one of those that have that style axle. All right, so now that the axles are out, we're going to start getting everything ready to get the subframe lowered a bit. That will allow us to have the space that we need to remove the differential and then eventually fish out the oil pan. So what we need to do for that is we need to go around, unhook the motor mounts here. I think it's going to be easier to get the bolts coming down in from the top. I believe looks like there might just be 2 on here, but I could be wrong, there might be 3. So we need to unhook the motor mounts. And then on the front here, we have this cooler. It's got 2 bolts holding it in, one right here that I already removed, and then one on the right side at the front of the cooler, coming in from the top, about by my finger here as well. And that one is right up against the coolant fan, so I'm going to wait until we have the subframe down a little bit, go in and get that, so that we're not putting too much tension on any of these hoses up here. I believe, let's go to that point and hit you with the next steps. With the motor mounts now unbolted, I'm going to go around and remove any wires that are going down to the subframe from up above. So if we look here, we have one going to the electronic steering rack, one behind it here that hooks around. We'll just unhook this from the back side. Hard to see there, but there it is. We'll unhook that, chase that out, and then there's also another one here going to the top of the steering rack We'll unhook all those, make sure that they all have tons of slack so that when we lower the subframe, we're not putting any tension on those. Okay, so I've got these two plugs unhooked from the steering rack. And then from the back side here, where those wires come in from the kind of engine bay side of the chassis there, there's a T30 that went through here. And then there's sort of a pin that locks this into place. If you give it a wiggle enough, it'll come free. And I don't need to pull it out. It's just got all the room in the world to move around, and it's not going to have tension on it. This one here didn't actually end up needing to be unplugged because that wire runs down to the rack at the front. We got this wire unhooked there, and that one, I don't know, it got pulled around somewhere over there, but everything's unhooked there. So now what we're going to do is make sure we can unbolt the steering rack from the column. So up here, there's a pinch bolt right there. It's a eTorx. And so what we need to do, if yours is not facing down like this, you can push or pull on the knuckle along the tie rod end there until it's visible. We're then going to lower the car, go up into the engine or into the passenger area, and we're going to run the seat belt through the steering wheel. And that's going to keep the steering wheel from moving and breaking our clock spring once we have this unhooked. We're going to keep it in the same orientation that it is with the front end hooked up. So I'm going to go ahead, lower it, do that, and then I'll come underneath and I'll pull the bolt out that goes up to the steering column. As you can see, I went ahead and got that bolt out, and I've started pushing it back, just tapping it with a hammer and a pry bar, and I'm going to just leave it there for now. I'm going to start lowering the subframe now, and as I get more wiggle room there, I'll start backing it off the rest of the way. So around the base of the subframe, we have these large, maybe a 21 millimeter, but we'll confirm that. And there's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, so 6 total. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break all those loose and back them out maybe an inch for now and get the subframe down, but not, I don't want it fully unbolted and hanging free yet. So go ahead and do that. But before we do that, just make sure that you've double checked you have your engine brace in so that obviously when you unbolt this, the whole engine doesn't fall through and land on the floor. So as you can see, I've got about an inch gap all the way around the edge of the subframe. Got it hanging down a little bit. So now I'm going to go around and just verify that everything is disconnected from the engine bay before we let that hang down all the way. So I'm going to check all these power steering, electrical connections again. And now that I have room, I'm going to go remove the second bolt to this cooler up here so we're not putting tension on those hoses. And then I'm going to get my transmission jack or pole jacks underneath the subframe and get that lowered down all the way. Okay, so I went ahead and got the whole subframe lowered down, supported at the front just so that it sits level without the rear end kicking up and just getting in the way of everything. So now we obviously have all the room in the world to get our differential removed and then get the oil pan out. So next thing we're going to be doing is disconnecting these 4 eTorx bolts to the front drive shaft. I'm going to go ahead and drain the front differential while it's still on the vehicle. That's the 14 millimeter Allen key there. I'm going to break loose the fill plug as well, just while it's on the vehicle and stable. And then we have 1, 2, and then 3 and 4 on the top bolts that hold the differential up against the oil pan, and then the whole thing will pop out and we can remove it from the vehicle. Okay, so we were able to get the differential removed. The only other thing I had to remove was this bolt to these lines here, as that was covering one of the bolts to the differential. And then I did remove the breather tube that sits on the top of the differential before removing it, just so I didn't break it in the process. As you pull out the bolts to the differential, this one on the top right here does back out into the motor mount. You can remove the motor mount if you want, or if you unbolt all of them and just pull the differential out with that bolt stabbed in through the differential hole, you can get it out that way as well. So now that that's out of the way, we're ready to remove the oil pan. So go ahead and drain the oil if you haven't already. And then we're going to unplug the oil level sensor here. And you have 1, 2, and 3 bolts in through the bell housing, and then a whole bunch of them all the way around the perimeter of the oil pan, after which you should be able to remove it from the car. So the only other additional thing I had to remove was this one E-Torx here that holds in these transmission cooler lines, and then we're able to get the pan out pretty easily. If the pan is stuck to the engine, you can get a pry bar in on the side here to break the C's, and it should slide right out. So once we have it out and get everything cleaned up, I'm going to remove the axle end here so that I'm not pressure washing into the bearings there, and then replace that seal as well as the seal on the front differential there before reassembling. So now that we have all of the parts cleaned up, I'm going to go ahead and get this seal replaced and new O-ring on the axle housing here. So to do that, I'll just use a pry bar or a screwdriver, get under the edge here and pop this old one out, clean up the surface, and I'll get my new seal. And you can have a seal install tool or just use a punch and a hammer and work your way around evenly, not bending it, and get it all down. Even though it's fully installed when the seal is flush with the housing. So now that we have the new seal and O-ring installed, you go ahead and remount this onto the oil pan. I did put some silicone lubricant on that O-ring so it doesn't roll as we install it. So go ahead and get that bolted on, and then we'll do the seal on the differential. So now with the front differential, we're going to do the same thing. Do that O-ring, put some lubricant on it, and then we'll replace the seal on this side as well. So I've got the differential all ready to go in, oil pans all put back together. Went ahead and got the new gasket, and I'm just going to line it up on there how it needs to be oriented. I've got the engine side of the sealing surface all clean as well. So now we'll go ahead, and I typically take 2 of the bolts and just put them up through the gasket to keep it oriented, and then we'll fish it in there and go ahead and get the whole thing bolted up. I typically start by getting every single bolt started, just a couple turns in by hand, and then start tightening it from the inside out to the edges until everything's fully torqued. So now we've got the oil pan installed, everything is fully tightened down. I went ahead and left these coolant lines for the transmission loose. That's just going to give me a little bit more room as I install the differential. So that's the next thing we're going to do, is get that differential stabbed in there. Make sure that you don't have any dirt inside the hole there, the seal where the O-ring is going to seal. Make sure that O-ring is lubricated, and we'll pop that on there. And then the only other thing to remember with the differential is have this one longer bolt already inserted into the hole on the top right. That's if you decided to leave the motor mount in. If you remove that motor mount, you'll have all the room that you need. So go ahead and get this in. We'll get the 4 bolts tightened, get the drive shaft, the front drive shaft bolted back up as well, and go to that point. Okay, so we've got the differential now installed. Got the breather back on the top, everything's tight, drive shaft is tightened onto it. I put the drain plug back in, but have left the fill plug out. I'm gonna wait until we have the axles installed to fill the differential with fluid. And I've also got these transmission cooler lines reinstalled. Next thing we're gonna do is start getting the subframe raised back up. And we're gonna get it to the point where all the bolts are started, just a couple of turns like how we were hanging it earlier on. So we're gonna make sure that as we raise it, the motor mounts get fished back into where they belong. We're going to watch the steering shaft and get it reinserted if possible as we raise it up, and then get all of our holes lined up. These front ones here have kind of a dowel pin that they sit on, so if we can get those 2 fished on, everything else will slide into place more easily. And then watch as well our wires, that they are fed in the way that they need to be as we raise that back into place. So as you can see, I have the subframe loosely installed and hanging there. I've ran the wires back up and around to the steering rack and have those plugged in. I have the one wire plugged in up at the front here too, and attached back into place. So the other thing I did is I got the transmission cooler in the front bolted back down, and I got the steering shaft slid most of the way into place there. As you can see, both motor mounts are lined up. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and tighten up the subframe bolts the rest of the way, pull the subframe all the way up, and then I can finish installing the bolt through the steering shaft there. I can put the bolt through the wiring loom on the side here, and then I can also, trying to remember what the other thing was I can do. Oh, we can get the motor mounts reinstalled as well. Okay, so now we've got the differential fully installed, motor mounts are fully tightened down, all the wiring is installed. We have the one bolt holding in the wiring loom towards the front there. So now we can start working on getting our axles installed. The first thing that we're going to do is pull the suspension out of the way and stab the axle into either the differential or the extension housing there. Be careful when you feed it in of our new seals there, not to bend it and damage that new seal. So we'll get it started, and then you'll push it in. You should feel a solid clunk, and then it'll fully seat, and I'll show a video of what that looks like once it's fully seated. So now we have both axles stabbed in on the inside. What we need to do now is reinstall the lower part of the shock, and after we do that, we can pull these out of the way and stab the axle back into the hub. Okay, so now I've got the axles in. They're tight, they're staked, but we still have the lower control arm that's loose. As you can see, I have the lower part of the shock installed as well. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to bring this control arm up, and we're going to get all the bolts started. We're going to leave them loose because we want to tighten these bushings under vehicle weight. So go ahead and we'll do this one first, and then we'll have to raise or lower the hub to get that one to line up. Of the bolts that we have here, one of them has sort of a lock nut, and the other is just a regular nut. The one with the lock nut goes on the from the control arm to the subframe, and these bolts all come in from the rear of the car towards the front, like that. Both for the bolts going to the subframe as well as the shock. Now that both of those are started, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my post jack underneath the hub of the wheel here. You could do it under the ball of the knuckle. And I'm going to raise that up until the point where my lift arm starts to get light. If you're doing this on the ground, you're just wanting to take up the weight of the vehicle, compress the suspension ways. And while it's loaded like that, we're going to tighten both of these bolts. Go ahead and do that on both sides. Okay, so everything is now tight with the suspension. The next thing that we need to do is go ahead and fill up our front differential. The way that we're going to do that is we have our fill plug here on the side. You're going to have to use a pump with a line that you feed up into there, and you're going to pump it full until fluid starts to dribble out of that, and you can put your drain plug back in. I like to do this where I fill it up and I rotate the wheels back and forth a little bit, get some of that fluid circulating, and then top it up one more time. So we'll go ahead and fill that up right now. So now that I've got the differential filled, I can clean up a little bit more down here. Go ahead and get that drain plug tightened up, and I'm going to go up on the top side, remove the engine brace, install a new oil filter, and fill this with oil. So I went ahead and got the new filter installed, got it filled up with oil, removed the engine brace there, made sure everything was put back together up top. Now we'll go underneath again, double check that everything is hooked up. Got our differential filled with oil, don't forget that. And we can go ahead and start it, run it, make sure that there's no leaks or anything, and then we can get all of our under trays put back on and get the front tires reinstalled. So here we have it running, and we can verify we don't have any oil leaks from the oil pan. We ran it in gear for a little bit, made sure we don't have anything from the differential or the differential seals. So all that we have left to do is get all of our trim panels installed. We'll start with the metal reinforcement plate and then get all the plastics reinstalled. If you run into any snags along the way, feel free to comment. I'm typically pretty quick to respond. But other than that, good luck.